So as promised, here we'll go over the installation steps for WSL 2 and how to install a specific version of Ubuntu Linux, the distribution that we'll need to work on, how to update your system if needed, how to then configure WSL 2, and a couple of optional steps. For example, how to install Windows Terminal, which is a much more streamlined terminal experience rather than just command prompt. And finally, how to troubleshoot some errors which you might go into and you might have. So this is going to be a lengthy video. This might seem a little bit overwhelming, but I'm confident if we go step by step and slowly but surely, slowly but steadily, it's going to all work out. And in the worst case, if something breaks or you get an error somewhere at a certain point, at least you know at which point you got that error at. So you can troubleshoot that error at that specific breaking point. Okay, so let's dive into WSL installation. Now, these directions come straight from the Microsoft website. They have this section here where they have install WSL, which is pretty much an automated process. One command does everything. Unfortunately, this is the bad way of doing this. If everything works fine, everything works fine. If something during the automated installation process breaks, then you're faced with a bunch of errors that can be really cryptic to you. Again, I mentioned before that WSL is really aimed at a more advanced user, but even the beginner, I think, can figure it out if we go step by step. So what we're going to do is forego their their automatic installation process, which will also probably install the wrong version of Ubuntu Linux, because we need a specific one. So what we're going to do is actually go to their manual steps for older versions, which is oddly enough misnamed, because what it should be named as a manual installation steps for all versions. But that's okay, Microsoft, we forgive you. You're only a $100 billion company. And we need to take a few steps just to make sure that whatever system that you're running on, Windows 10 or Windows 11, is ready for these installation steps. So our first step is actually going to be their step 2 here. Oddly enough, we have to make sure that your Windows 10 or Windows 11 is ready and updated enough for the installation process. If it's not, you're going to run into problems immediately. This is the problem. Now, this is mainly aimed at the Windows 10 users. Windows 11 users, generally Windows 11 out of the box is ready for WSL 2 installation. So the version 21H2 is ready for WSL installation. However, it does make sense to update, just to run the Windows update just in case. But if you really don't want to, that's fine, you can just install. I still do recommend running the Windows update if you're on Windows 11, just in case, just to possibly have less bugs. Now, if we are on Windows 10, this is not optional, this is needed. What we need to do is make sure our Windows 10 version is 1903 or later with this build 18362 or later. Now, how do we do that? Well, we go into our command prompt, we run it as administrator, and we type in a simple command called winver. And this command also works on Windows 11 as well, if you want to check your Windows 11 version and optionally update. But on Windows 10, we really do need to do this. And we press enter. Now, this is what popped up for me. Let me make this front and center. And what do we have? My version is 22H2, OS build 19045, Windows 10 Pro. Now, that's a little cryptic, right? says version 1903 or later. So is 22H2 later than 1903? I don't know. If I never really ran into Windows versioning. So what I can do, very simple, is Google Windows 10 version history on Wikipedia. And here we have the version and the code name. So as I can see here, 22H2 is, well, 22H2, and that's the latest update. It's the latest update, and it's good until October 2025. So I'm definitely good. If I take a look at the requirements, 1903 for x64 systems, meaning if you have an Intel or AMD CPU, that doesn't matter, version 1903 or later. So I find here version 1903, and the code name is 19H1. Anything beyond that is a no-go. So if you have a 19H1, Redstone 5, basically right here, if it's 19H1, Redstone 5, any of these Redstone, Threshold, and whatnot, you must update. That's not an option. The installation will just break. You must update. As a suggestion, even if you have something like 19H2 or 20H1, I would still recommend that you update. Windows updates are free. They're very easy to go to update. You can go to Microsoft website and just run, here, check for Windows updates. You can follow the directions, start button, settings, update, security, Windows update. I know it may be annoying. I actually have my Windows updates turned off because I really don't like it popping up every other day. But once in a while, I actually do run full updates because it's important, especially for a lot of the tools that we need. It's important to have the most stable release of our operating system. And they do fix bugs as they go along. So this is the first thing that you need to do. Windows 10 users, not optional. Windows 11 users, technically optional, but still, you should run your updates. So if you need to do this, if you have an older version, pause the video, run the updates, come back to it. If you don't need to do this, well, then we can go to step 2, which is technically our step 1. And I now assume that everybody has updated, if we needed to. So our step 2, which is step 1, is to enable a couple of things first. We will need to run a few terminal commands within the Windows command prompt, within the Windows terminal, to enable some settings within the operating system so that WSL2 can install properly. Now, this might look a little bit scary, again, but we'll go through it. So what we have here is step 1, enable the Windows subsystem for Linux. Here we are enabling the settings for the installation. So I go into the command prompt once again, and I run as administrator. This is important. Always run as administrator. Actually, let me show you what happens if you don't run it as administrator. I'm just going just run it. I'm going to copy this here. I'm going to paste this command in here, and I'll press enter. Let's make it front and center again. I'm going to press enter. Why is it not pressing? Come on. All right. Maybe it's not even letting it do that. All right. Command prompt, enter. There we go. So if I'm not running this as administrator, I'm getting the following error. Elevated permissions are required to run DISM. Basically, Windows is telling me, look, you're trying to do some really important operating system changes. We want to make sure that you're running this at the highest possible user settings level, user settings permissions, because you're changing the way that the core operating system works. So this is why we have to run it as administrator. It makes sense. It makes sense from the security purposes, because you don't want to just randomly change how the core operating system works. Now, since these terminal commands are coming from Microsoft, people who built Windows, we do assume that they know what they're doing, right? Okay. So again, I'm running command prompt as administrator, and here we have administrator command prompt. Cool. and I will paste this in here. Now again, as I mentioned before, this is not an operating systems course. This is not a low-level programming course. We are not focusing on bash and shell scripting and whatnot. So it's okay to be very overwhelmed with this command, but I can break this down. Essentially what this does. Essentially what we're telling Windows is, hey, Windows, go into this dism.exe executable file with these options online and enable features. Feature name is going to be Microsoft Windows Subsystem Linux. Enable all of the features and do not restart. We have this no restart. So do not restart just yet. I'll restart manually later when I need to restart. So we copy and paste that and we run that. Now might take a few minutes, depending on how new your laptop or PC is, how powerful your CPU is, how much RAM you have, and so on and so forth. So it's okay just to wait. As an aside, if this hangs, so basically if, let's say, within 5 or 10 minutes this is still showing enabling features, or if it errors out, so throws an error and whatnot, it's really okay to just close this out, restart the system, basically restart your computer, and go into the terminal again, copy and paste the same command again, and try to run it again. So you're not going to break anything by exiting out if it freezes up. You're not going to break your system. You're not going to break your computer. This is really one of those examples where turning it on and turning it off, turning it on again actually does help. All right, so I have a response. It says enabling features 100%. The operation completed successfully. Cool. I'll close this out now. This we did, right? We made sure our Windows is updated. So now we go to step 3, the enable the virtual machine feature. So we enabled the Windows subsystem for Linux. We didn't install yet. And now we need to enable the virtual machine feature. Okay, same kind of thing, right? Copy, command prompt, run as administrator, and once again, paste this in here. Again, what we're saying, hey, Windows, go to this executable file with all of these options, online and enable feature. Feature name is going to be virtual machine platform. Enable all of them by default and do not restart yet. I will take care of restart later, essentially. And again, this might take a minute or two, few minutes. I have a pretty powerful system here, so it goes fairly fast. And again, if this freezes, so if it gets stuck on enabling features, or let's say if it gets to like 50% and it's stuck there, again, it's okay to close this, restart, and then try this step 3 once again. You're not going to break anything. You're just retrying the same step. If for example, you have this specific error over and over, the same error over and over again, make a note of this error so that we can solve that error more efficiently. Okay, so we have the virtual machine feature enabled because remember, technically WSL2 is not a virtual machine itself, but it does run within the virtual machine environment. So long story short, we need to have it enabled. All right, so since we have this, we go to the next set of cryptic Microsoft directions and exactly what we need to do. Now the next step, the next set of Microsoft really cryptic directions say that we need to download a specific kernel update package and just run wsl.exe -- install. That's not really the good approach here. If we run just wsl.exe -- install, it will install the default Linux distribution. And as of fall 2024, this is the 24.04 Ubuntu version. And that is not exactly what we want, mostly because it's the newest version of Ubuntu Linux. And the newest and the greatest is not always the right approach. It is okay if you want to test out all the new features. It is problematic if you want to use a lot of the build tools, a lot of the dev tools, which we want to use, which we will need to use, and you expect them to run smoothly without bugs or errors. So what we're gonna do is, once again, go into the command prompt, run as administrator, a little bit annoying, right? And do the following command. We will do wsl.exe -l space -o. So what we're telling WSL is to show us, list all of the distributions that they have online. And if you press enter, we have the following: Ubuntu, default Ubuntu, Debian, Kali Linux, all of these Ubuntu versions, Oracle Linux, OpenLeap, Linux Enterprise, and so on and so forth. So note here, note this asterisk here. It says default distribution is denoted by the asterisk, and then we have the asterisk by Ubuntu and the friendly name Ubuntu without a version. Up until about summer 2024, if you just install a default Ubuntu, it would install 22.04. Most recently, if you just install the default, it will install 24.04. And that's the newest Ubuntu version. Think of it like Windows 10 or Windows 11. And let's say if Microsoft just came out with Windows 12, which is still in its kind of like its beta stage, in its testing stage. This would be the newest version. And it does not work with some of the tools that we need. So what we need to do is install the most widely used one, the most widely supported. And we will point it to 22.04, to version 22.04. So with the following command, wsl, let me actually make this a little larger here, wsl.exe -install -d, -d means go and grab a specific distribution, space, and we will say, okay, not the default Ubuntu, but Ubuntu -22.04. This is where literally everything matters. Spelling, capitalization, all the dashes, all of the options. So if this is written out exactly like you see on this screen here, you can press enter and it will begin this installation. Now this will take some time. This will take some time because it needs to download the whole image for Ubuntu Linux. It's like 2 or 3 gigabytes, for example. So on a slow connection, on a slow internet connection, this is gonna take, maybe a good 15 minutes, maybe 10 to 15. I have a pretty fast connection, so this is going really fast. But don't worry if this is going like 1, 2, 3, 4% and so on. And while this is going, let me then elaborate on why we want a specific version. Why don't we just install the newest one, right? Well, there is that so-called Goldilocks zone, because we need to use some tools like npm, PSQL, for example, MongoDB server, MongoDB Compass and whatnot. Let's see, VTEG for React, and other tools as well. A lot of these tools are maintained by generally a small community. So they're not always updated to the next and the greatest version, right? So still, MongoDB server is officially not supported for the latest 24.04 version. They might support it, and they probably will in the long run. I mean, they definitely will in the long run. But it will take some time, right? So there is that Goldilocks zone, especially within Linux distributions, where you don't want to have an old version, something like 18.04, which is kind of nearing its life cycle, And you probably don't want to have the newest version, for which a lot of the tools are still not supported. Now, if you do want to test all the newest features, by all means. But you don't want to be spending most of your time debugging. You want to be spending most of your time working, right? So this is where we need to find that Goldilocks zone. And for now, 22.04 is that Goldilocks zone. Now, for me, it says that 22.04 LTS has been installed, and now we actually do have to restart. If you remember with the previous steps, I kind of put the restart kind of like away for later, because I knew that at some point I will need to restart, so we will take care of of all the updates within one restart. So when you get to this point and request operation successful, and again, once again, as an aside, if it freezes, if it hangs up on you, essentially, it is okay to just come back and run the same command again. Now, again, this command is important, and the version is especially important. 22.04, this is probably the key here. Now, in the end of the video, there will be an attachment to kind of fix the version number if you just went and installed the default version. However, in order to avoid the headache, make sure that you're installing the right version the first time. All right, so right now it's saying, okay, the operation is successful. We need to restart. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to restart. When you restart, you'll see that when your system reboots, your Windows will say some updates need to be applied at the boot screen. So you just let it do its thing. And that might take a few minutes depending on your system. And when you restart and when it logs in again, generally it should start up immediately. So when your system boots up, the command prompt should open up and the Ubuntu installation should resume. If it doesn't, in the case if it doesn't, we'll deal with that. It's okay, because something automated might not have fired off. That doesn't mean everything broke, but generally, in probably 90% of the cases, after restart, the command prompt should fire up again, and the installation should resume. So let's do that. Let's restart. All right. So my system has restarted, and as you see here, by default, this terminal window popped up again, and it resumed installation of Ubuntu 22.04. Now, if it didn't, that's okay. Don't worry. We'll go over that, what to do if it didn't. But assuming it did, and it should by default, it will now start configuring and installing the Ubuntu image, the whole operating system within the Windows operating system, and technically within WSL. So Windows runs WSL 2, and WSL 2 runs Ubuntu. You have that kind of like progression of events. And this will take some time. Again, if you have a pretty fast system, this might take a few minutes, as they say. If you have an older system or a more of a slower processor like an i5 or even i3 or a Ryzen 3, like one of those low voltage laptop processors, this will really take good maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Because what it has to do essentially is unpack the whole all of the files which it downloaded in the last step, unpack it and install a brand new operating system within WSL. It's a huge installation. So this is a good time to go grab a coffee, grab a tea, eat something, I don't know, because you might actually be waiting for this for a good 10, maybe even 15 minutes. Again, as a word of advice, if let's say 15 minutes later, if this is still showing installing, or let's say this blinker is not blinking anymore, It just looks like it's frozen. It's okay to exit out and start again, and I will show you how to start this installation again at a next step, kind of like a troubleshooting step. But for now, I'll let it run. I will come back to this. I'll come back to this at the next screen, because you probably don't want to hear me talk for a good 10 more minutes. And a good 5 to 6 minutes later for me, it went from the installing to please create a new Unix user account, meaning that it installed correctly. Now, these steps are important. Basically, you're creating the Ubuntu username, and it's already giving you a hint. Essentially, your username does not need to match your Windows username. It can if you want, but it doesn't need to match. Really, that username is not that important. It just sets your home directory as, for example, John something something user home directory, or in my case, Yuri user home directory, for example. So I will just have it as my name, I suppose. This step, though, the password, is really important. This is your Ubuntu Linux password when you're running Ubuntu Linux within WSL. This is not your Windows password. This is your permissions password. This is a user password for Ubuntu Linux within WSL. You will need it. You will need it when you're running commands with a sudo command, it's a super user command. You will need it when installing new applications into it. You will need it when you're installing any of the dev tools that we need. It's extremely important that you remember this password and that you don't lose this password, because if you lose this password, forget this password, guess what? You have to do all of these steps again from scratch, essentially uninstall everything and start over from scratch. In the process, losing some of your work. Not fun, right? So I'll type in the password, and when you type, it will not show here, but trust me, it's actually typing, because then you will have a password confirmed. So let's say if I type in something wrong, it will say, nope, passwords do not match, password is not changed, try again. Basically, the first password I typed was one thing, and the password confirmed did not match. So you know what, I'm gonna say yes and try again. And this time, I'm going to make sure my passwords match, and I will press enter. Cool. And now I am running Ubuntu Linux version 22.04 within WSL, within Windows. How do I know this? Well, it shows me all the information here. It shows me the version that I'm running. It shows me my system resources, management of my system resources, memory usage, and so on and so forth. Now, remember, I said that most likely this window will pop up. The window will pop up and resume the installation automatically after restart. But let's see what you would need to do if, let's say, when you restarted your PC and the window did not pop up and it did not resume the installation. So let's take a look at that here. If you restarted and the terminal window did not pop up automatically and continue the installation, or for example, if you restarted, the terminal window did pop up and it continued the installation, but let's say after 15 minutes it's still installing, or it seems like the blinker is frozen, or it says program is not responding. These things can happen. Errors do happen. What we can do is, once again, go into our command prompt. Once again, run as administrator. And just basically do the same steps again. We will do wsl.exe --install -d distribution name Ubuntu -22.04, and we'll press enter. For me, it will just say, well, it's already installed, here you go. But in your case, if it didn't resume installing automatically, or if it errored out or stopped or froze up, it will go through those steps again. Oops, I need to spell -exe correctly. So for me, it says, okay, it's already installed. I'm launching it. Here you go. You have Ubuntu 22.4. What do you want from me? In your case, if it didn't resume, it will resume installation, and then eventually you will get to the same steps as before, where you select your username and you will select your specific user password, which again, really important. Do not forget it. Do not lose it. Can't stress this enough. So when you have that done, let's see a couple of next steps and what we can do to configure the system and to make the whole experience a little bit more streamlined and possibly, hopefully, avoid bugs in the long run. Now we will configure a couple of things, make sure that we have set the right WSL version, because there are technically two versions of WSL. Not Ubuntu, not the distribution, but the actual WSL Windows Subsystems for Linux, which runs the Ubuntu distribution. Confusing, right? So again, think of it. Windows runs WSL, and WSL then runs a specific Linux operating system. So generally, and I do say generally, the version 2 should already be set as your default version. That's the newer one, the faster one, the one that uses the least resources. However, just as a precaution, we can go here, again, run as administrator, and make sure to set default version, set default version 2. And it says operation completed successfully. It's going to be the same message whether it's already version 2 or not. It's just going to say operation completed successfully. Okay, so we have everything set up. Now, step 6, Microsoft says install Linux distribution of your choice, which again makes the directions a little bit murky, because hey, Microsoft, didn't you just tell us to install it here? And it tells us to install from Microsoft Store, which you really don't want to do, because on their screenshot it's 1604, but here we have 1804 to 2004 and 2204. See, they don't even list the 2404, the latest one, as one of the options, even though their automatic installation installs it automatically. Good. Great job, Microsoft. You're only a $100 billion company. You can make mistakes. This is fine. So assuming everything went fine, if I back in the terminal, go WSL-L, we will have the following output. Windows Subsystem for Linux distributions, Ubuntu 22.04 is our default. Okay. Now, if you were following the steps very, very carefully, not installing the default version, installing the specific version, then you're at this point. Next, let's take a look at technically an optional feature called Windows Terminal. See how we always have to open up the command prompt here, have to go here, find it, run it as administrator, then open up WSL here. When I open up WSL here, it takes me to the home directory, but then it takes me to the System32 Windows directory. If I list everything here, for example, this is listing my Windows files. I need to then step a couple of steps back into my home Linux directory. That is annoying. Why wouldn't it be better if I can just open up WSL in one click and it would just take me right to my home directory within my Ubuntu Linux? It would be nice, right? Well, we do have that option. And for that, we have Windows Terminal. Windows Terminal is available here on Microsoft Store. If you search for it, search for Windows Terminal, it will come up as developer tools. And we will download that and we'll run this. And this is a fairly small download, but the install might take a few minutes. Again, depending on your system, depending on your internet connection, depending on your RAM usage. Okay, so it installed pretty quickly. And it opened up the command prompt again for me here. So I have it here, right? Very similar to if I went back into command prompt and I ran it as administrator. All right, I have it here. The directory is different, but I'm still within the command prompt. Now, in Windows Terminal, if I go here, see, I have a couple options. I have Windows PowerShell, command prompt, Azure Cloud Shell, which we don't need. And look at that. It picked up my default Ubuntu 22.04 installation. It's already here for me. And if I click on it, it throws me into my Ubuntu Linux distribution right in my home directory. Home/my username, not in that Windows directory which I had before there, but right into my home directory within my Ubuntu Linux distribution. In fact, we can even go a step further. We can go into the settings. And I can go into startup. And instead of starting it up on PowerShell, I can tell it to start up with Ubuntu 22.04 LTS. And I can click save. I will close this up here. Close all. And then instead of going to command prompt, I will search for terminal app here, which is our Windows terminal now. I'll open this up and look at that. Automatically, I am in my WSL. I'm in my home directory. If I want to open up another window within WSL, what do? I just open it up here. And now I have two of the windows. If I want to open up, let's say I want to do something in command prompt. All right, I have a command prompt window here. I have a WSL window here. I have a WSL window here. Much more streamlined rather than just command prompt, and you have to have 6 different windows across the board. You have to deal with directories and whatnot. And technically, this is optional. Since we're not going to be using Azure Cloud Shell, I'm going to delete this profile. And I'll just leave Ubuntu as the default. And I'm going to save that up. I'm going to close it again. I'm going to open up the Windows terminal again. Terminal app. And now I don't have the Azure. I just have Ubuntu, making sure I don't click on anything wrong. So I have my Ubuntu 22.04, command prompt, and Windows PowerShell. If I need to work with any of these, it's as simple as just clicking and opening and switching between tabs. Again, this is optional, but I do recommend that you install that because it's really good. A really good option to have. It does help your work process. It does help your workflow a little better. Now, the next totally optional thing, some of you might be a little bit better at searching out the new features for WSL 2. You might find that, oh look, there is an optional program which can run the desktop Linux, not only the command prompt. So here we don't have the GUI. Basically, we don't have the desktop Linux application here. We just have all of the commands, something like whatever, sudo commands and whatnot, apt install, apt remove, everything that we need to do, to work with our dev tools. And you might say, hey, look, there is a a program where, in addition to WSL and the terminal line Ubuntu distribution, you can also install the desktop GUI, meaning that you get the full desktop GUI within Windows, meaning that Windows runs WSL runs Ubuntu Linux, and then that Ubuntu Linux runs another desktop within the Windows desktop. Yeah, there is an option to do that. It is still in the in really testing beta testing stage. I don't recommend this just yet. One, it is a really big resource hog. Like if you have a pretty new i7, i9 processor, or a pretty new Ryzen 7 and at least 16 gigabytes of RAM, maybe 32, you will see that it still eats up a lot of resources. And it does crash a lot. So maybe 2025, maybe sometime in a year, this is gonna be a good option. For now, it is still in its very, 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 very early stages. So if you see it, if you go through directions, I mean, it's completely up to you, but just take it with a grain of salt that it is still in its early process. It's still in its early stages. It is still very buggy, the whole desktop application, and it does eat up a lot of resources. For the length of this course, the Ubuntu terminal within WSL will do everything that you need to do, and in fact, it will do a really good job at introducing you to the fundamentals of working with a Unix-like file structure and Unix-like commands. So when you are on a Mac, for example, later, you will find that transition be very, very smooth, and you would even feel even more comfortable than you would before. Okay, that's about that. Next, we'll take a look at what happens if instead of installing a specific version, like I said, 22.04, if for some reason it installed 24.04, or if you weren't really following directions, you just went and just did WSL DXE install and install the default version, and the default is 24.04, and you need to switch over back to 22.04. So the last part is completely optional. Basically, if you need to downgrade from 24.04 to 22.04. Now, if you were speeding along and you just install the default Ubuntu version, what might happen, and I'll run this within command prompt, is something like this. If you go into your WSL and if you type in the following command, lsb underscore release -d, and you're showing 24.04. So basically the newest version. That is not a good thing. Well, you have the newest version, you will run into bugs installing some of the dev tools. So what we need to do then is a couple of steps. One, make sure to install the correct version, and two, make sure to install switch over from the default version 24.04 to the correct version, and then remove the default 24.04 version. So let's exit out of here and let's clear this up, and let me make this bigger. Okay, what I'll then do is with wsl.exe -- install -d Ubuntu -22.04. Again, this is only if you have 24.04 running. And for me, it will say that this is already installed and it's going to launch 22.04. which is fine. For you, it will install it. It will take some time, again, a good 10 minutes sometimes, and then it will open up in 22.04, and that's fine. And now, oops, we'll exit that. And now we're gonna be running within 22.04. But it is not going to be running 22.04 by default. It is going to be running 24.04 by default. And how do I know that? Well, let's go back into the command prompt. I will go into WSL, and I will say LSB, what is it, release? And it's running 24.04. Well, what gives, right? We just installed 22.04. It's not, I need the 22.04. Okay. Well, if we go here and list, and I'm back into the command prompt, back out of WSL into the command prompt, and if I say WSL-L, I'll see that I have two versions installed now. Ubuntu default, assuming you install the default one, and then 22.04. And it's showing that this one is the default. What I need to do is set --set default, and set default is going to be Ubuntu 22.04. And if I run WSL.L again, I will see that 22.04 is a default. And then if I run WSL again, go into the shell, and if I go LSB release, now I'm running 22.04. Okay, almost done. Almost done. We are running 22.04 by default. We're good, except one more small step if you have installed the default 24. Let's go into my file explorer. And in this case, I see that I have the 22.04 version and the default version. So both of them are taking up space, the space that I don't really want them to take up. What's the point of me having two different operating systems here? So what I can do in command prompt, I can say WSL unregister Ubuntu, not 22.04, the default 24.04. If I do that, I go back to my file explorer, I'll see that I don't have the default one, I just have 22.04. If I list them, I see that I have 22.04 as the default. If I go into WSL and I get that same command lsb release -d, I'm running 22.04. So in that case, if you made that mistake initially, you should be set now, and you should be running 22.04.